Hello everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to the Book Refuge and welcome to another weekly reading wrap-up. Today we have week 14 of 2022 and I'm feeling pretty good this morning. Got my hair dyed again. I always feel so sexy when like my roots are all purple and all the things, and you know, I spent 45 minutes doing my hair, so we're gonna work it. All right. We're gonna dive in to the 13 books that I read this week, and there were some fantastic ones. There's some stuff all over the place. It was a very interesting week. So let's go ahead and dive into these and not waste any time. I'm filming this much earlier in the morning than I usually do because I have a baby shower to go to today. But I'm glad because it'll be filmed, and it'll be done, and then I'll feel good for the rest of the day because I won't have to rush. So let's go ahead, man. Oh, I want to point out one thing. I got this adorable little trinket for my birthday from my best friend, and like you can't see it because of the ring light, but like there's these lights on it, and it's this tiny little thing of Hogwarts. Isn't that adorable? So I just thought I'd show that off, but it lights up. I might turn it off so I don't waste the battery since you guys like can't see that, but it's just hanging out. Isn't that fun? Okay, sorry, let's go. So the first book that I read this week was my reread and the beginning of the S.J. Emma Long Throne of Glass. I did a reading vlog for this. This reading vlog went up last Monday, so I will go ahead and link that up there, but I may not vlog every book rereading it, but I might do it for some of them because it's fun, and you guys have said you really want more reading vlogs, so make sure you support that video. Otherwise, again, I will step away from vlogs because people tell me they want them and then no one watches them, and it's frustrating for me. But anyway, we're not whining about it. This is a YA fantasy. It's been very interesting. We have almost 200 people who say they're participating in the readathon. You know, I don't know if everyone does. Some people might just want to watch it, which is totally fine. And it's funny to me, some people who don't know anything about it, right? Because these books, I guess, like, they're just so foundational to my reading experience as well as things that pushed me to be on Booktube. So it's just so strange. I mean, that's how it is. Not everyone reads everything or heard about it the first time around or lives in this country and it isn't as big of a deal to them. But yeah, so this book, if you don't know for some reason, this is a YA fantasy. This isn't my normal bag, but because we're doing S.J. Emma Long, which is a reread, romance does feature heavily later in her catalog of books. She really is a fantasy romance writer at this point. But back when this book came out, that wasn't as much of the case. This was more of like a, you know, badass girl power book. And it was really in the height of, you know, female looking badass on the cover of a book, you know. And this is Selena Sardathian, and she's an assassin, and she has been sentenced to a certain number of years of hard labor in the salt mines of Antiboyfriend. And after she's been there about a year, she gets tapped by the Crown Prince Dorian Halivard. I'm so proud of myself for remembering these names. Oh my God. And she is tapped to enter a competition that his father, the king, is having to find a new assassin who will, you know, be his killer for him. And there will be 23 other champions that get brought, and there will be these different competitions. So it's very interesting because, yeah, it's a little bit of a like battle royale. You don't have to die. If you lose, you just get kicked out. The thing is, for her, if she loses, she has to go back to prison. So they're very high stakes. And it becomes clear as soon as we dive in that there is much more to Selena than we knew, and some big secrets that she's hiding that we don't know yet. And we meet Dorian, the Crown Prince, as well as his bodyguard and best friend, Cale Westfall. Sarah has said that Cale's name, it's like chaos, but with an L, so like Cale, just in case people wonder how to pronounce. So this was delightful, and I think I still gave this 4 stars. Let me see. Yeah, I still gave this 4 stars. 4 stars is what I gave it the first time. This was actually my third Sarah J. Maas that I'd ever read, but it was the first one that I ever tried to read. So this was very difficult for me to get into back in the day. And so I actually had then read ACOTAR and ACOMAF. And once I read those, there was no other books in that series out yet. So I went back and tried this, and then I forced myself through. And this time around, like, my enjoyment level was definitely much higher because there are so many things that are seeded in this book, and I can't wait to talk about it. The live show for SJM Along, the first one, it's going to be on my channel, and it is next Saturday. Is it Saturday or Sunday? I can't remember, but the date is the 16th. It is April 16th at 8 p.m. on my channel, and we'll have the other guests here who are going to join us, and we'll be starting, and I cannot wait. So this was 4 stars. And again, there isn't a lot of romance to start with, but I promise you we get there. There are things. Okay, the next book that I finished was Bright Like Midnight by J. Wolfe. So I was very nervous to read this book, I will tell you, because I love J. Wolfe. I really loved the series that preceded this series, which was actually a high school bully series, which y'all know that's one of my least favorite tropes. But a book in that series is the closest to a Carter Mahoney that I'd ever found. A little more forgivable than Carter is, but you know. And so I have been reading her since then. And I'm on her like personal arc team. And so the thing is, the book before this one, Soft Like Thunder, had a heroine who is having to deal drugs for her family. Now, I know recently I've talked a lot about books, not a lot, but some books that had drug things in them that made me very uncomfortable. And that one was more one that I didn't understand why the heroine was doing it, because she had other options. She was just being stubborn, so she chose drug dealing. So anyway, so I didn't love that one. But there was a scenario in that one where her best friend Zadie is held hostage by kind of the guy higher up on the chain. His brother is like the gang leader, the drug dealer, and he's his brother, and he helps him out, basically. And Zadie gets held hostage by this guy. And this book, Bright Like Midnight, is their romance. So I was pretty intrigued, but I was nervous, again, about how much the drugs were going to factor into this. And I'm happy to say that they didn't really at all. And in fact, I don't want to spoil this book because I do highly recommend, and I do believe you could read this one without reading the other one, because anything that's pertinent, she puts in there. So if you're sensitive to, like, you know, talk of drugs and stuff, maybe you won't want to read Soft Like Thunder, but you definitely could read this one, because Amir, it starts with a prologue of that time when they're being held, when he's holding her hostage to get Helen to, you know, get him their money, right? You know, it's a thug thing, you know. And she is this tiny, plump, sweet, soft-spoken girl who is just so drawn to Amir and this air of protection that he exudes. And so after their experience together, she keeps an eye on him. She keeps watching him. And this book picks up 4 months later when she is now putting herself in his orbit to see if something's going to come of it. And there's a guy that she's seeing that she uses him to get close to Amir. And then this guy is a total fuck up. And she ends up trading herself to Amir to keep this guy from being hurt. She agrees to basically be his like domestic slave for a certain period of time. Yeah. So I really love this. This actually had some dynamic play in it. And it also, like, it's listed as like a bully romance, but you'll see if you read it. So there was a little bit of DovCon, but not really, because it's mostly CNC if there's ever that. There are drugs mentioned, but because he's at, and again, this is what I love, well, not love, but this is what's okay with me, is like, I know that drugs are a big part of illegal activities. Like, we know it, but I don't want to see people using it. And there isn't any drug use of the main characters in this book. They are peddlers of it. Does not make them good people, not excusing it, but when we're reading that Anyway, so point being, I gave this one 4.5 stars, and this was, or no, I gave this one 5 stars. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. I gave this 5 stars, and it was a spice rating of 3.5 for me, and I had a great time with it. So I'm glad to be back on the J. Wolf train. This one was excellent. Then I read The Tyrant, Alpha's Rejected Mate by Cate C. Wells. This was only my second Cate C. Wells. I do want to read more of her books, but it's just, it's difficult for me because a lot of hers are all wrapped up in series, and I'm not super interested in that at this point, but that's okay. This is kind of like it sounds. We have an alpha who he is trying to bring his pack out of the Stone Age and trying to make sure that their women are taken care of, but he is the alpha, and his mate, it comes to light that his mate, Una, Killian is the name of the alpha, she is this smallish woman who has a twisted leg. We don't know how that happened to her, and she has a latent wolf. Her wolf has never come forth, and so she's seen as very weak, and so the way that this pack works, the lesser of the pack serves everyone else. So she is serving a meal in the Great Hall one day, and one of Killian's, one of the ladies who pleasures him sometimes, goes up and starts kissing on him, and for some reason this time, Una's wolf realizes that Killian is his mate, and so, or her mate, and bursts out, which is a horrible thing to happen because she's not all of a sudden stronger than anyone else or this super powerful person, and she gets the beat down from this woman who was sitting on Killian's lap basically, and she gets beaten down and thrown out. And when Killian confronts her about this, she explains that, she's his mate. And he's like, no, you're not. I don't feel the pull. I would feel the pull. I would not be able to be with other women if you're my mate. You're lying. And she's like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not lying. There's something going on here about why he doesn't notice. And I wouldn't spoil that for you. But what does become apparent to him is there is something going on, because now he can't stop thinking about her and being drawn to her. And he realizes that he's made a big mistake. So this book has a very good grovel. That is what it's known for. There were times in the beginning that I was getting very anticipatory of the grovel, because each time there's a slight to her, each time she's rejected and treated badly, you're like, the ticker's going up. The amount that he's going to have to do to win her over, it's going up, and I was getting very excited to see how it was going to play out. So I did, however, I love this book. This was a channel recommendation, as well as Jesson and Juliet are going to be doing it on the Smart Women Read Romance podcast. So I had been wanting to get to it, but it was already on my TBR for this month because it was a viewer recommendation. And I wanted to try another Cate C. Wells. So I did give this one 4.5 stars because the grovel was great, but y'all know that I do not like being given lady blue balls when I read a book. And I know he needed to grovel. I'm not disagreeing. However, I also don't like coitus interruptus happening more than once. And it happened 3 or 4 or 5 times in this book, because it would be like they were getting into a sexy situation and then she's like, no, I don't trust you yet. And it keeps happening over and over and over. And I don't like that. I don't like that. Don't let it get that close if we're going to walk it back, is my thing. I can only handle it once or twice before I start getting mad. But the book overall, it was so good. It was so good that I didn't dock it a ton. I still rated it 5 stars on Goodreads, but it's 4.5 for me. And also because the spice, it was only 1.5. For how much sexual tension in this, for the spice to only be 1.5, I just felt severely I had lady blue balls, like I said. And Jesson just laughs at me and she's like, he needed to grovel. And I was like, he was groveling. If he's groveling, don't let him get that close to your lady bits and then turn him away. Hold off a little more, because If they never get that close and it's just like the grovel's happening, I'm fine. But if you build up the tension for me and don't release it that many times in a row, I start to get sexually frustrated. And nobody wants a Jenn who's sexually frustrated, okay? We don't want it. All right, moving along. I was only too thrilled to receive a physical copy of Toxic from Maggie Cole. She sent me a lovely signed copy of this. This is my bookmark I already had because I have all the Mafia Wars. This book comes out April 14th. So it comes out, I think it's next Thursday. It comes out this coming Thursday. And this is the spinoff to the Mafia Wars. This is book 1. This is Toxic. Mafia Wars New York. And so this is about Dante Marino, who used to be friends with Bridget O'Connell. I think she was O'Connell before she was O'Malley. Now, if you've read the Mafia Wars, which I know not everyone has, because again, there's 10 books in there, you will know that Bridget had a tragedy. Her husband was killed. And she took her 2 children to New York and cut herself off from the O'Malleys in a way that kind of pissed everyone off and shocked them, that she took her children and moved, including her children, who are very sad that this happened. Again, if you've read the other series, we find out why, and we know what happened and why this decision was made and like what was factoring into it. However, if you haven't read that series, you could start fresh with Toxic. You absolutely could. And again, I understand that when I'm saying, hey, you should go read these other 10 books before you read this one, I understand that that's a lot. However, we're book lovers. And if you want the ultimate satisfaction, I suggest you at least read the O'Malley books, which is books 6 through 10. But you don't have to. You can start fresh with this because this one goes back 24 years in time, when Bridget, it's O'Connor, not O'Connell. Okay, Bridget O'Connor actually was friends with Dante Marino when they were kids, and they actually almost had a thing. But Dante was young and cocky, and he thought he would have time to make up for his mistakes. But he didn't, because he hurt Bridget, and she went away to school in Chicago, and she met Sean and married him and had 2 kids and left him. And they eventually like reconcile to the point of friendship, and he does actually really like Sean because he's like, nobody can dislike Sean, he's great. But he's always felt that he missed out, and he never settled down or was with anyone because Bridget was the one that got away. But now she's been back in town for, I think it's been 5 years since Sean died, and he still hasn't been able to get close to her or get a second chance, which not like he was going to swoop in immediately, because he knows that she loved Sean. This wasn't a bad husband or any of that, but she's also been extremely resistant to any, salvo of friendship, entreaty of friendship. She's been very much like, no, it's not happening. But things are going to start spinning and things are going to start happening. And what we found out about Bridget in the Mafia Wars, the first series, we are going to see how that was from her point of view, and how her finally getting to the point where she can reveal what's happened, what that looks like for her family directly, because we only saw it through the eyes of the O'Malleys when we were in that series, and they definitely have a different view of Bridget and what she's done to their family and what's going on, So this was a 5-star book for me. This was a 4 on the spice scale. It was very spicy. There is some very nice dynamic play in here that comes about. Some very healing, kinky situations are great. Dante is a dirty talker. They're sexy. It's fantastic. The trigger warnings, though, are there is previous assault, there's attempted assault, there's torture, violence, and death. This is the book that I put an Instagram story up recently where I was crying about how beautiful vengeance can be and why I love reading Mafia, because there's a secret Bridget is keeping for those 5 years since her husband died. And once that can finally come to light, the vengeance and justice that the men in her life are able to get for her was beautiful. So, just saying. It was hard to read, but it was beautiful. Next, I finally finished my arc of How to Be a Wallflower. This came out on March 29th, so it already came out. But as I said, like, I just wasn't in the mood for this book when I was trying to read it. And so once the audiobook came out, it was fine. That's a thing you'll find with me. Like, I try my damnedest to always read my arcs before a book comes out, because that is the, you know, that's the contract that you're entering into when you get an arc. However, two things. This was an unsolicited arc. You know, it was just Eloisa James sent it to me. Not that I'm complaining, but I also just really love audiobooks for my historicals. Historical arcs are just harder for me to get through. I don't know what it is. So I did, you know, get this read like the week it came out was my goal, you know, as close to that. And plus, when it is a book that is like from Avon, I know that hundreds of people are reading the arcs and talking about it and sharing about it, and it isn't as like vital to the author as like, say, like Maggie Cole. Like, her arcs come out of her pocket. She has to buy them and send them out, and so I try to read that and shout about it as soon as I can to help that author, because they have to do all of their stuff on their own. Eloisa James, she has a team at Avon that helps with that, and you know, anyway, that's just how I think about stuff. Point being, this was great. This book is connected to My American Duchess just a little bit. Jake, the hero in this book, is an American and is actually friends with Mary. And we see Mary and her children and puppy George, who is now an older gentleman, quite a bit. This takes place about 10 years later. And we do even see the Duke of Trent for a minute here. But we have a heroine whose name is Cleo, and she is a commode heiress. And she really doesn't want anyone to try to woo her or anything. And then she meets Jacob Astor Addison, who is acquiring businesses, and he wants to add to his theatrical holdings. And he's also planning to propose to a woman back from home eventually. And then he meets Cleo, and they fall for each other, and they become friends. And there's something to do with clothing, them dressing each other, and all these things. Like, it was okay. It was fun. The chemistry between them, the banter, the sexiness, that was great. The story wasn't compelling to me. The plot wasn't that compelling to me. And I was missing, I mean, I feel like Crystal said it really well. It was just missing that extra spark that I sometimes get from Eloisa James. And that is that extra spark that I'm looking for when I read historicals. You know, like, there's historicals that are just okay and they're fun. And then there's this like elevated level of enjoyment. And I wasn't getting that from this. And part of it, I will say, comes from the fact that I didn't read this one all in one sitting. It was really chopped up over a few days. And I didn't connect with it the way that I did with, you know, like My American Duchess, which I just adored. This one was like pretty sexy. It was fun. So I gave this 4 stars, and it was a 2.5 on the spice rating. And there wasn't really any trigger warnings or any of that to worry about with this one. Then I read a book called Last Call by Naomi Lucas, and this was a sci-fi romance. So this book is about Jack, who is a cyborg bounty hunter, and he is chasing his quarry across the universe, and he has to stop at this planet to fix his ship. And when he gets to this planet, he finds this girl named Allie, who is living alone on this planet because she had been escaping from a commune with a bunch of other girls like herself, and the ship crashed, and she's the only one who survived. And so she's been living here alone for like 6 years on this planet. And Jack and her discover each other, and she ends up agreeing to take him to the crash site of her ship so that he can get parts from it to fix his ship. And they're both like immediately attracted to each other, and he basically decides that she's his, and he's going to take her home with him and keep her. And yeah, it was just like, it was fun. This was also like, this was really sexy. There was some kinkiness in this. There was blood play that happened, which was not expecting, but there's also horror elements going on because this book like isn't just a sci-fi. There's some other things happening. So I gave this 4 stars, and it has a spice rating of 3. This does have some trigger warnings for death and grief because she is grieving for her friends who died, and we will talk more about that in a minute. Then I listened to Royally Yours by Emma Chase. This is the 4th book / it's a prequel for the Royal series by Emma Chase. This book is about Queen Lenora, who is the grandmother in the original trilogy. And this is taking place, this is kind of a historical romance too. They keep like the time periods like vague, but it's clear that it starts like after the Second World War, and her father and mother are still around, and it's her and her younger sister. So it's interesting because like it takes place in fictional like Westco. I think Westco is the name of the place. And so there are a lot of parallels between her story and like Queen Elizabeth II, but also like Queen Elizabeth II exists in this universe too. So it's interesting. But she's 19 years old when her father dies and she becomes queen, and her advisors immediately start pushing her to get married because she can't be a queen on her own and make decisions because a young woman can't do it. And she's just flabbergasted by this. So they start pressuring her to get married. She has a best friend named Thomas who is gay, and he says like, let's get married. And she's like, you know, we have to make a kid together. And he's like, yeah, but you're my best friend. Like, we could do this. However, Thomas has leukemia and starts dying. Thomas has a brother who has been traveling for the last few years. And when Thomas tells his brother he's dying, his brother comes home, and Thomas makes sure that Edward and Lenora are going to be okay. And he asks them to take care of each other. And so they get engaged, and they're going to have an arranged marriage. And this is the love story of Edward and Lenora. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. The amount of times I've cried in this one was great. And now, part of the reason I don't love prequels, especially when we know one of the people is passed already, because in the original trilogy of this, we know Edward has died quite a few years ago. The queen is a widow, and she's trying to prepare her grandson to be king when she retires. And, you know, that's part of the reason I don't love reading sequels is I like my people to still be alive when I read it, you know? However, the way that this one was written, we don't see even an epilogue where Edward isn't there. You know, I think that was very smart of Emma Chase. Like, we have their romance together and their first like year of marriage, and then it only skips ahead like 5 years and shows them with their children. So we never have to see an epilogue like where he's gone. But I still cried so many times because their romance was so beautiful. Like, it was heartbreakingly beautiful. Like, it made me so happy. It made me so happy, and I cried in the most beautiful way. So this was a 5-star read for me, and I gave it a 3.5 on the spice scale because Edward is a naughty boy. Also, I listened to the audio for this, like I said, and this one is a Shane East and Andy Arndt, and whenever they are narrating together, I am in a very happy place. So this was a good thing. The trigger warnings for this one, though, are death of quite a few people. Her mother and her father and Thomas all pass. Terminal illness, grief, and then a traumatic childbirth. There's a very traumatic childbirth that has a happy ending, but it was intense. Then I read Collector of Souls by Naomi Lucas, which was the next book after Last Call. This book was a clusterfuck. I know that is a harsh word, and I love Naomi Lucas, but I don't know what the fuck this book was, and I know I'm not the only person because I read a lot of reviews, and even people who loved it were like, I was very confused. I was very excited to read this because obviously I really enjoyed the first one, and part of the reason I'm even reading this trilogy is that there is a series after this one that is a cyborg shifter series that I really want to read. So this one, though, has like an angel called Seraph who can make deals with people for their souls. And it starts with Ophelia, who is the friend of Allie, who's dead in that book. This book goes back in time where Ophelia is on the run for her life and she makes a deal with Seraph for her soul once she dies. And then her mind is wiped and she's put right back where she was before she was about to die. And she doesn't remember who Seraph is, but she knows there's this man in the shadows who's watching her. And so now basically he's going to watch her until she dies and then she belongs to him. But he doesn't want to keep waiting. So he starts making himself known to her at different times. They're like, this was also kind of like a Hades and Persephone retelling, sort of. There was paranormal elements. This one wasn't really sci-fi like at all. And then of course like it ends with her dying and like being with him. And it all takes place before the first one did, because she's still with Allie for a lot of that, you know. And we just read Last Call where Allie is literally grieving her friend for 6 years, and in fact is even like haunted by a specter who seems to be Ophelia. And it was just all very fucked up. And I have no idea what was going on. Like, I was completely confused. And I just did not enjoy myself. So I gave it 2.5 stars, which I actually think was generous because I rounded it up to 3. And it had 2.5 on the spice rating. This one had trigger warnings for death and then assault. And I was confused by the whole thing. Then I read a Dramini fanfic called Imprisoned. This was by Stein048. As always, I get these from an archive of our own. If you would like to know how to find it, you go to an archive of our own in Google. Just type it in, it will come up. You will have to like accept that you're there, blah, blah, blah. And then you can type in Imprisoned by Stein048 and it will come up, okay? Every time I talk about a fanfic, people are like, how do I get it? And I'm like, I literally said, go to an archive of our own. That's the only place I get fanfic from. I know there are many, many other places, but it's the only place I get it from because I like to be able to download it to my Kindle. Because you can download it to your Kindle with a Mobi file. So anyway, enough of fanfic 101. We know how it is. So this one is a captor-captive situation. So this one starts with Malfoy Manor, and Ron and Harry escape, but Hermione basically sacrifices herself so that they can get away, and she has to stay behind. And then Draco, at the behest of his aunt Bellatrix and Voldemort, tortures Hermione to try to get information. And Draco is choosing to do this to her to keep her from being tortured by other people. So he is hurting her and torturing her, but he's doing it to protect her. He's also using her own wand to torture her, and apparently in this one that makes the torture like a bit less because her own wand doesn't want to hurt her. It was cool. So what happens though is they basically like trauma bond with each other, because he's very traumatized with having to torture her and she's very traumatized about being tortured, and she's still of course trying to figure out how to get away, but they end up seeking release with each other and kind of forming this interesting relationship, which definitely has some Stockholm syndrome, but it is also kind of this like mutual thing between them where like it's not so much Draco being the one doing all the manipulating. Like, it really is like both of them using each other for this. However, that is about the first half of the book. The first half of the book takes place between like when the Malfoy Manor stuff happened and the Battle of Hogwarts. Then we have this crazy scenario that happens for the second half about what happens after the Battle of Hogwarts. And when I tell you there was an excessive amount of Horcruxes involved, there's an excessive amount of Horcruxes involved. So I explained this in my review of this on Goodreads. The first half of this book was a 6-star book for me. The way that Draco and Hermione fall in love A+. I loved it. I love that kind of dark romance shit. It's fantastic. And then the second half just ruined a lot of it for me with what the conflict was with Harry and Voldemort and what was happening after the Battle of Hogwarts. I wasn't totally here for it. So I ended up giving this one a 4-star, and it had a 3 on the spice rating. The trigger warnings are rape, sexual assault, torture, imprisonment, and then I said there were a lot of Horcruxes. So there we go. Then I read one of the books on my TBR, which was her Wanton Wager by Grace Calloway. This one is actually a Persephone and Hades retelling, and it was a lot of fun. So we have our hero, Gavin Hunt, and he's a gamester, and feisty heiress Persephone finds, who goes by Percy. She goes to make a deal with him because her brother owes him a bunch of money, and they end up coming to a deal that if she can resist 6 nights of seduction spread out over once a week, he will release her brother from this deal. He's very confident that she is going to cave to him, and she's very confident that as long as he doesn't force her, which he's promised to, anytime she says no, he's going to stop, because of course he's our hero, then she's like, I can resist him. But we'll see how it goes. This was another great book in Mayhem and Mayfair. I was a little disappointed that this hero likes kink. He definitely has control issues. He's a dom in a lot of ways, and we don't really get to see a lot of it. And this is something I'm finding with quite a few historicals who hint at kinky things and then it doesn't happen. I know some of Grace Calloway's books are sexier than this one was, but I really love the story in this one. So this was a 4-star rating for me, and I gave it 3 on my spice scale. I can't wait to finish this series because there's some characters I'm very excited about. Also, this book was written 10 years ago already. This came out in 2012. So it's I'm still pretty impressed for it coming out 10 years ago. The level of kinkiness that's in it is great. All right, then I read another book on my TBR, which was called A Clean Start at 47 by Nora Phoenix. And this was a gay romance age gap. Our hero was previously a drug addict and a doctor, and he was married to a woman. And it's 6 months out of his life basically blowing up. He's, as the title suggests, he's 47. He is out of rehab. He has started working again, but he can't be a doctor anymore. So he's teaching online courses. So he's able to teach medicine, but he can't practice because he was addicted to narcotics. And he came out as gay, got a divorce. His kids won't talk to him. His ex-wife obviously doesn't want to talk to him either. And he decides he wants to get healthy. So he starts going to a new gym. It turns out, though, that the trainer he's booked an appointment with is his son's best friend, Ben, who he's known since he was a teenager, and he knows that Ben is gay as well. And so they begin a friendship and a working relationship, and some things start to come to light. So this was the first part of a duology. And though I was intrigued by certain parts of this, which I'll get to, I'm not going to complete this duology because this book drove me so crazy that I don't care enough to read the second one. Even though this one is going to become a daddy little boy dynamic, which is cool, with the younger hero being the daddy, which I found to be such an interesting thought because our older hero, as he, is learning things, he becomes interested in having someone to make decisions for him, which is kind of why he's looking for this, even though he doesn't know that's what he's looking for. However, this book, which I was intrigued by the foreword because Nora Phoenix, this author, this was a bit of a tribute to her ex-husband who came out as gay. He doesn't have any of the same problems that that this hero does, but this was her tribute to him because she's friends with her husband, and she doesn't have the same resentments that the ex-wife in this one does. But this book read, I wrote in my notes, which I know sounds kind of harsh, but I said it's like baby's first gay romance. And I didn't mean baby, I meant like newbie's first gay romance. Because any little thing that has to do with a gay relationship or liking men, or even the small elements of BDSM we start to talk about, is so overly explained. It would be like you've never read anything that had to do with gay romance at all. Like, it is painfully overexplained. Also, and this is in the description, like, this has a lot to do with, like, our hero was raised in the church and he has a lot of internalized homophobia and, like, self-doubt and, like, hate for that. And it is an obnoxious amount. It's an obnoxious amount. And again, it warns you in the blurb that this will be a trigger warning, that it's a lot. But to me, it was a point of, like, it's written almost like a PSA. And there was nothing, like, sexy about that to me. This was painful to read. And I love gay romance. I love age gaps. I love everything about that. But this one, I could see how it could be cathartic if a gay man had specifically went through this situation. But then also, they would know all of these things. So this would maybe just feel like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I've lived through it. Move along. So I don't know. So though I don't feel fully capable to, like, give this a super, like, in-depth, like, oh, this is why it doesn't work, because it's not my story to tell. Either physically I didn't write it, nor have I lived it, but it also wasn't sexy. It was extremely talking about the religious prejudices and the homophobia and, like, everything that he'd done wrong and the things he'd been hiding. And then there was also flashbacks to when, like, Ben was younger and when he thought he was hot, and, like, also different points of Kenzie's life when he was young. Like, it just wasn't sexy or fun to read. It was painful, and not in the dark romance way. It was just, I don't read romance to have to suffer like that. And again, I'm not gay. I'm not any of those things. So I can't relate in that aspect of it, you know? So that's why, like, I'm not saying there isn't a place for this book or that it won't be cathartic for the right person, but it wasn't for me and it didn't work. So this was 3 stars for me, and it actually, too, it was only a 1 on the Spice scale, because you're supposed to read this as duology, and I'm not going to continue, but literally there was one scene of, like, kissing, and then, like, he comes in his pants. So we couldn't even call this more than that. Anyway, okay, then I read The Antiboyfriend by Penelope Ward. This, I just did a random pick for yesterday. I just wanted to read a contemporary that I didn't have to think about too much. And this book is narrated by 2 of my favorite narrators, Sebastian York and Andy Arndt. They are just the voices of contemporary romance to me. Like, I love their voices. And this one is a neighbor romance. It's a single mother. It's friends to lovers. Her daughter has Down syndrome as well, so that was a really interesting bit of diversity in here. So our heroine, Karis, she has a 6-month-old daughter. She had had an affair with her boss, who subsequently went back to his ex and left her alone. And she has a next door neighbor named Deacon who is having some pretty loud sex next door. Now, we've read books like this before. Usually that person is an asshole and will be like, I don't need to be quiet. That's not what happens here. They run into each other in the hallway, and he is very friendly and asks her how she's doing, and she says, your sex is kind of keeping me up at night, and he's so embarrassed, which was just really cute. He's like, oh my god, I am so embarrassed, I am so sorry. And she's like, it's okay, just like, I have a baby and I need my sleep. And he's like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. And this friendship forms between the 2 of them, and what goes from there is this relationship of friendship to more that lasts over the next, like, couple years. I thought this was so beautiful. It was really great. The 3rd act conflict in this was not what I was expecting. It wasn't some, like, horrible, like, misunderstanding or, like, argument, but it just was very random, like, how it happened. So that kind of lost a little bit of steam for me at the end of it. But I really enjoyed this book. I haven't read a Penelope Ward in ages, and I have quite a few that I've been given as gifts. So I'm really glad I listened to this. I listened to this in like all one sitting, and it was fantastic. So I gave this 4 stars, and it was a 2.5 on the spice scale for me. Love that. Then the last book that I read was another fanfic, and this was a Hermione and Snape fanfic. This was called An Accidental Affair, and it was by Desert Sea. So this one, it's really hard to explain this book, but basically Hermione is working at this like artifact place, and Snape is there. He's brought some students in for, which is random, I guess, had a little bit of a field trip. She's working in, is she in Hogsmeade? It might be Hogsmeade, I'm not sure. Anyway, there apparently is this artifact store there or whatever, and there is this book with these spicy, like, it's like a guide to sex or something like that, which is random, and it ends up getting ruined. And the guy who runs the place says that they need to find a replica of this or Hermione is going to get fired. And Snape is like, well, that's your problem. And she's like, no, it's not. And anyway, it's crazy. They end up deciding to rewrite the book together. So they are alternating female and male point of views, and they're writing this book about sex. And these scenes that they write to put in the book is sexually connects them with each other. And then there's a twist, which I wasn't expecting. So this one was pretty short. I'd say it's probably like a novella length type one. It's always hard to tell with fanfic. I'd say it's probably like 250 pages. And it was very spicy. There's a little bit of kinkiness happening in it. And again, once you find out what the whole picture was, I think it could have used a few more chapters to wrap that up. But it was interesting. So I gave this 3.5 stars, and it was like a 4 on the spice scale, 4.5 maybe even. It was pretty spicy. So there we go. All right, those are the 13 books that I read this week. Thank you so much for joining me for a weekly wrap up. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I put up new videos 3 to 4 times a week, so make sure you're here for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.